The views expressed on this program are those of the producers and individuals appearing on this program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Sun Prairie Media Center staff, its video service providers, or the staff and elected officials of the City of Sun Prairie.
Hello and welcome to Real Reviews. My name is Jamison RABBITT, and this week it's just me here in the studio, and so once again we get to have a little fireside chat between you and I. I've got a bunch of interesting movies that I want to talk to you about, some of them that are very old, some of them that are very interesting, and I have some films that I really think that you, the viewer, might enjoy. And so let's get started first with what we have here on the marquee. We have what is the biggest movie of the weekend, a record-breaking movie that came out this week. Of course, I'm talking about Minions: The Rise of Gru. This is the fifth movie in the Despicable Me Minions franchise, following the hijinks of Gru and his little yellow friends, the Minions. This movie is set in the 1970s, and as the title says, we are going to follow how young Gru started to rise to power. He is a 12-year-old boy in this film. He's obsessed with the Vicious Six, which is a supervillain gang that he dreams of joining. The gang is led by a Wild Knuckles is the name of the character, voiced by Alan Arkin. Wild Knuckles is kind of like his hero, but Wild Knuckles gets kicked out of this gang. The gang ousts him. He's sent out packing, and this gives Gru his opportunity to interview to join the gang to become the replacement. Things don't go well for him at all, as the new leader of the Vicious Six, a lady named Bell Bottom, voiced by Taraji P. Henson, dismisses him, and so he steals something valuable to her. It is an amulet that is able to harness and unleash the powers of the Zodiac onto whomever wears it. And so Gru is sent looking for a mentorship from someone else who has nefarious intentions for him, and everyone is in search of this magical amulet that Gru has stolen. But this is it's a Minions movie more than anything. It's in the title. It is a Minions movie, and most of the film has us following the adventures of Kevin, Bob, and Stuart, along with their new friend Otto. And we see them building Gru's first villainous lair, and when he gets into trouble, of course, it's their job to find a way to save them, because that's their mission in life, is to serve a villain. And this leads to this cross-continental trip full of mishaps and shenanigans, where the Minions learn Kung Fu. You see it right there. They're learning some Kung Fu. It's a series of short set pieces. I think you saw here in the trailer, there's a plane flight that goes awry, the Kung Fu segment. And your mileage may vary as far as laughs go with these Minions movies. Interesting to me, the Gru storyline felt very secondary in this movie, and to me was kind of the least interesting part of the film. I really enjoy when the Minions are the focus on screen, because they kind of have a Three Stooges aspect with them, especially when it's just our main three Minions. And I like that. Because of that, this franchise introduces that old style of slapstick comedy to a new generation. And in a way, it probably feels safer because, they're not real. And they're not real people, and we've been shown that they're kind of indestructible. We see one of them, his head is so hard, it's impossible to damage it. And so I enjoy that kind of comedy. And it's almost reminiscent more of Mr. Bean style of comedy to me, especially because of the gibberish speak that all of them share. In this Minions franchise, to me, really surprising, huge with the teenage demographic as well as kids, but teenagers who grew up with this franchise. The original Despicable Me movie came out 12 years ago, and so these kids that have grown up since kids watching this, now teenagers. And I'm sure you've noticed there's been a big contingent online of people posting and using social media to kind of troll this movie, but also to celebrate this movie for a contingent. It also broke the all-time July 4th box office record, which is something pretty huge, pretty notable considering where we're at right now as a movie-going public going out to the movie theaters, compared to, you know, big 4th of July blockbuster movie releases of the past. And so it's probably between this and Top Gun Maverick breaking records. It's really encouraging to see that people are going out to the movie theaters to check these films out. This movie made $127 million over the 4th of July weekend, which is really impressive. Theaters were packed. Now, having said all that, this isn't a movie that's made for me. It's not a movie that's made for a 40-something-year-old man. I get that. And I've always kind of been, for the most part, a passive participant in watching these movies. I did enjoy the first one. I thought it was different. It was different because it was a type of comedy that we hadn't seen in a little while in kids' movies. Pixar has their own thing. And I enjoyed that. But I've kind of been worn down by the incessant saturation of the yellow Tic Tacs and the Oshkosh Bagoshes. And so, as opposed to, say, Beavis and Butthead, which had a movie that came out this last week, Beavis and Butthead Save the Universe, which many will look down upon, but I thoroughly enjoyed. That's a film that did a great job of resurrecting a long dormant franchise and captured what I loved about those two idiots, and has a story that had a lot of laughs for me in that movie. This one didn't have as many, unfortunately, and so in a roundabout way, I get back to Minions: The Rise of Gru, and I end up giving it 2.5 stars. It's fine. I didn't find myself laughing a lot, but I also didn't find myself disappointed by it. I just kind of, like I say, passively sat there, but my daughter and her friends that were there with us, they all were laughing. They loved it, and that's great. That's the audience that this is for. And so if you are part of that audience, go check it out. It's a fun time for sure. Let's move on to what I have on my streaming spotlight. And this week, the first film I'm going to talk about is a film that I watched over on Hulu, and it is a film called The Princess from director Levan Keat. Stars Joey King as the titular princess. She is a strong-willed princess who refuses to marry the man who has been presented to her. He's a cruel sociopath who has his eyes on her father's kingdom, and her father knows that he doesn't have any sons, so he must reluctantly agree to this marriage or risk losing everything. But this princess has other ideas, which leads to her being locked in the tower of her father's castle. But she's got a surprise up her sleeve, and it's that she's a total badass and is ready to fight her way all the way down that castle in brutal fights with anyone who gets in her way. It's sort of a reverse of movies like The Raid or Dread, in which those movies, the heroes must fight their way to the top of a building to take out the big baddie. In this one, she's fighting her way down to the bottom of this castle. The plot is incredibly basic. I mean, it's basically a Princess Bride plot, kind of. You have Dominic Cooper as Julius, who's the evil man who wants to marry her by any means necessary, and he sends hordes of people to go out after her. He's got a lady who you see here in the trailer with a whip, who kind of is his possible real-life love interest, but it's understood that he's got to marry this princess to get the kingdom and then probably kill her off so that they can enjoy the spoils of that kingdom. But she doesn't want to marry him. She also has a friend, Moira, played by Olga Kurylenko, who kind of helps her in her battles through this. And there's a lot of great fight choreography. I think Joey King is really entertaining as the princess who just won't stay down. The fight choreography is better than a lot of movies that I've watched recently. The princess, she gets creative in how she approaches these much bigger men through this castle, and a lot of narrow spaces, a lot of interesting weapons, medieval weapons being used. She has assistance when she needs it. I really like Dominic Cooper as he's playing the standard bad guy role in this, the guy who just wants power basically and will do anything to achieve it. My one big gripe is this movie was billed as a a fantasy action film, a medieval fantasy action film, which, yes, in one sense it is. But when you have a medieval castles and such, you would kind of expect a different kind of fantasy, something that falls more in the fantasy genre. And that really wasn't here. It was kind of just your straightforward action movie that really doesn't take a lot of breaks throughout. It's kind of just fight, fight, fight as she's going through all types of different opponents, basically, on her way to get to the bottom and free herself and free her family from this issue that they have. It's a film that doesn't ask too much of their audience, and it delivers on a really simplistic premise. Gives you 90 minutes of action. Not a whole lot else, but I did find myself really enjoying watching Joey King in a role that I haven't seen her ever do before. This style of action. She normally plays a much more reserved character, in some period pieces, but this was, it kind of quenched a little bit of my thirst for a good choreographed action movie. And so I ended up giving The Princess 3 stars out of 5. It's fun enough. It's nothing you need to rush to your screen to watch. But if you're looking for some interesting action, just watching a small girl fight a lot of big guys, it's a good time. So recommend that. The other streaming spotlight I have this week is one that's really interesting, one that I discovered recently and have been kind of kicking around trying to get around to because of the length of this film. It's kind of daunting, but it's over on Netflix. Is a film called RRR. That's it, 3 R's in a row. It stands for a few different things. I did a little research and it kind of stood for a few things. It's an Indian film made in India from director S.S. Rajamouli. It's a movie event. It's an epic film, 3 hours and 5 minutes in length. It's a Tollywood historical fantasy adventure that hits on many themes. It is centered around 2 historical characters in India's history, men who would go on to become legendary revolutionaries for India in real life in the 1920s. One of them is a character, Raju, again, a real person back in the time, in this played by Ram Charan, and a man named Bhim, played by N.T. Rama Rao. And these are, again, guys who would go on in real life to become revolutionaries in India's history. This film imagines there's not a whole lot known about their early days. And this film kind of imagines filling in the blanks during these undocumented portions of their lives before they became the revolutionaries that would attempt to overthrow the British rule in India and take down the British Raj amongst the forest tribes. And so it kind of takes elements from 2 mythical figures, and it's almost a superhero origin story because these 2 men in real life never actually met. They lived a couple of decades apart. But in this film, we see a version of these mythical men as something completely different. And it's this weird relationship between them as almost frenemies. Raju is a soldier in the British Army who has proven his worth as a man who can withstand massive amounts of pain, almost seemingly indestructible, in order to deliver the mission he's given. One of them is he is told by the British Raj, played by Ray Stevenson, to go out and take this man out of this crowd who is booing the Raj. How dare you disrespect me? And so he dives into this massive crowd, this mob of thousands of people who are protesters, basically, and he fights his way through all of them in a crazy opening scene. And you see, like, wow, this guy just is kind of indestructible. And so he's kind of superpowered. Now, Bhim is a man who is sent from his village to retrieve a young girl who was taken from her village by the British Raj because his wife, the Raj's wife, decides she just wants this little girl to take home with her as a trinket, as a token. And so Bhim he's more of a tank of a man who has superhuman strength. You see if you're watching this trailer, bodies are flying everywhere, a lot of wire work going on. It's a lot of fun, but the way these 2 guys meet is in an incredible sequence on a bridge as both of them are trying to save this young child. And it's a wild scene, and they both kind of realize that each other are special, that they have special skills, that they're not regular people. And from there, it's really this epic story that goes from them kind of being a buddy duo to a falling out that turns violent, and allegiances are tested. And there's just so many insane set pieces in this film. If you watch the trailer, you see there's just so much happening. It's 3+ hours. You have weaponized animals, buildings full of TNT that are being hit with flaming arrows. You have long, amazing fight scenes full of wire work and crazy stunts, great action. It gets really silly at some points, but it's got a heart that really keeps it on its course. There's also some very serious, brutal moments in this movie that are followed by the traditional big song and dance numbers that you come to expect out of Tollywood and Bollywood films. And these are great. They tell a story, they serve the characters well. And that's something that I always kind of struggle with the films that come out of India, is the big song and dance numbers. I always feel like, oh, this just feels thrown in. Here, I thought it really worked for me. The songs were good. And it also gets into a commentary about the people in India at this time and how they were marginalized and mistreated by the ruling British, and how these two guys would go on to become huge, legendary characters who fought to get rights back for the forest tribes in India and became mythical people in real life. And that's where the character of Scott Buxton, the Raj played by Ray Stevenson, as I mentioned, he and his wife come in as villains who need a comeuppance, and they play it so well. You just want them to get everything they deserve from these two men. Interesting enough, this film is currently the 4th highest grossing film in the history of Indian cinema, which is saying a lot. And in the history of their cinema, this is a big movie over there, and historically and culturally, it's huge as well. It's 3+ hours long. It's partially in English, but it's mostly subtitled. But my 9-year-old sat with me while I watched this movie and watched the majority of it, which kind of surprised me. And she was kind of invested to the point at the end where she had questions for me about the characters, and it showed that she was paying attention to it. So you can too. This film has a big cultural impact, despite the fact that it's wholly fictionalized. I mean, you have to know that going in, that this is mostly, almost entirely made up, other than the fact that these were at one point real people. But it brings to light the real men who fought so hard to overcome the Raj and to free the tribes of India. And it's a film that needs to be seen. It's entertaining in so many ways. I love the performances of the two leads. They are so much fun. I especially really like the character of Beam. And it led me to going and doing research about the real life guys. And it's an incredible story about both of these guys. And so, I mean, I've been talking for a while, beaming about this movie, no pun intended, but I give RRR 5 out of 5 stars. It's one of the best movies I've seen this year. One of only 2 movies I've given a 5-star, I believe, this year. Highly recommended. It's over on Netflix. It couldn't be easier for you to sit down and watch. And I do believe that if you do sit down and get it started, you're not going to feel those 3 hours, because it's just so entertaining in so many ways. So take my advice. Check it out. RRR is a tremendous movie. It's right over there on Netflix for you. For my movie throwback this week, I've got a really interesting film, one that I finally was able to sit down and watch recently. I've heard about it. I remember reading about it years ago, and it's been kind of difficult to track down until recently. I'm talking about The Passion of Joan of Arc. There've been many Joan of Arc films. This is one that came out during the silent era. 1928, this film came out, from director Carl Theodor Dreyer. It is a French silent film that was based on the actual court records of the trial of Joan of Arc. The film itself is focused on her trial and, of course, the subsequent execution. And it was a standout of its time. truly timeless in its production and its performance. The filmmaker Dreyer, who was a Dutchman, was invited by the Film Society of France to make a film based on Joan of Arc because she had a renewed popularity in France in the turn of the century. And they searched out this guy to make it, this Dutch filmmaker, which kind of rose the ire of a lot of people in France that we're kind of allowing a non-Frenchman to tell a story of one of our legendary characters. And he pored over records, he pored over court transcripts that still exist about the trial of Joan of Arc. He got the studio to build him a huge concrete recreation of the medieval building that she was in and on trial. And they spent the majority of the film then shooting it in tight close-ups. So you never really see the architecture around them. As you see, if you're watching this, a lot of the scenes are really tight close-ups of Joan and her accusers. But that is really where the performances pop out, because Joan of Arc is played by Maria Falconetti, who is a legendary stage performer, of course. His movies were kind of just starting to become a thing. And she is allowed to use really every inch of the screen and portray every subtle emotion of the young woman being accused of blasphemy, being accused, I mean, she's on trial for her life and being given every opportunity to just recant what she's said and save herself. And the filmmaker Dreyer really captures her earnestness, her subtle breakdowns, her defiance in the face of all these deceitful, mocking clergy who are trying to get her to give up what she truly feels is the truth to her. Speaking of this clergy, the way they're lit, the way they're shot really makes them grotesque looking. It's kind of an amazing feat of filmmaking and how the camera angle is placed to make these men just look horrible. And as they're, mocking her and pointing at her and laughing at her, you really feel how small she is in comparison to them. And Dreyer also chose this really harsh lighting, and those tight close-ups make them appear even more heinous. And really interesting to me was Falconetti, who came from the stage, wear a lot of makeup so the back of the auditorium can see your face. She chose not to wear any makeup for this film, which is kind of extraordinary, especially at the time. But she wanted to be basically, fully natural for this film, and you could see her flaws as well, which is not something that we normally see in film. And this film, a lot really interesting backstory to it, came under really harsh fire for some time from some of the scenes in it, from censors, from the French Archdiocese. They forced cuts to be made to this movie that Dreyer was not a part of. He did not have input into the cuts and changes that were made to his movie. And then in 1929, the year after it came out, there was a fire that destroyed the original cut of this film. And so there were many bastardized versions that came out of this film over the years. Some of them were just really horrible cuts that people just cobbled together and did voiceovers for and added different things into. But in a miracle that would baffle the duplicitous clergy in this movie, in 1981, an original print of this film was found in a janitor's closet of a mental institution in Norway, of all places. They found it and discovered that this was an original print before any of the cuts. There's an amazing backstory about how it got there. There's a remarkable story about how it ended up in this janitor's closet in Norway. I don't have time to really get into it, but you should check it out because it's really cool. But really, this is one of the singular, most perfect films that you will ever see. I was mesmerized by this performance, especially. Probably one of the single greatest performances that have ever been put on film. Maria Falconetti as Joan of Arc, in a silent performance. It's all in her face. It's all in the emotion. And it's heartbreaking. It's just, oh man, it kind of wrecked me after watching it. And it's streaming now over on HBO Max. There are two versions. There are two different Joan of Arc movies, make sure you're watching the correct one. It's The Passion of Joan of Arc, 1928. There's one that came out in the 1940s that's also on there, which is good, but nowhere near as powerful as this version. And so I recommend checking it out. Go watch classic film, and it's right there in this original form. It was brought from the dead just for you to watch. So I highly recommend checking that out as well. Now let's take a look ahead at what is coming soon. I'm looking ahead to the weekend, I believe, of July 15th. And I've got a few movies for you. That weekend over in theaters, we have a film called Where the Crawdads Sing. This is a movie that is set in the 1950s about a woman who is known as the Marsh Girl, who raised herself in the swamps of Barkley Cove and is suspected of being linked to a murder in this small town. Stars Daisy Edgar Jones. Looks really interesting to me, really quiet thriller. Also in theaters that week, we have a film called Paws of Fury. This is an animated film following Hank, a dog with a head full of dreams. He dreams about becoming a samurai, and he sets off in search of his destiny. Hank is voiced by Michael Cera. It's got a really fun voice cast. That's in theaters. For the streaming films that week, we have over on Netflix a film called The Gray Man, which is a film by the Russo brothers, who brought you the Avengers films, among other things. It's a thriller about CIA agents uncovering secrets, being chased around the globe by a psychopathic former agent. It stars Ryan Gosling, Chris Evans, Ana de Armas, and Billy Bob Thornton. It's a huge cast and some legendary filmmakers making that, so that sounds interesting. And then lastly, also over on Netflix, there's a film called Persuasion that'll be coming out. It is a romance following a lady who rebuked a man who wanted to marry her early in life, and she might get another chance at love. But will she be able to seize it? You're going to have to watch it to find out. This film stars Dakota Johnson, Cosmo Jarvis, Henry Golding, and Richard E. Grant. And again, that's going to be streaming over on Netflix. Before I move any further, though, I do want to thank our sponsor, Marcus Theaters, the Palace here in Sun Prairie. Thank you for sponsoring this program. Thank you for being so vigilant and loyal with us. We do appreciate it. We love being able to go into a auditorium, watch some great movies, sit in a wonderful dream lounger, and just escape for a couple of hours. It's great, and summer movie season is quickly passing by us. I mean, it's already into July, and we've got big movies coming out, and next week is no different. Next week, I'm going to be talking about films such as Thor, Love and Thunder. That's the big movie of the next couple of weeks. We see the return of Thor in a new Taika Waititi feature film. Also, I have a film called The Sea Beast. There's a streaming film, a Chinese horror film called Incantation. Those are the movies I'll be talking about next week, which is going to be a lot of fun. Before I go, though, if you want to keep in touch with this show, you want to join in on the fun, I love having discussions with you, the viewers. You can find us over on social media. We are on Facebook and we are on Instagram. Real Reviews TV, Real Reviews KSUN. You can also find us there. KSUN, of course, our home channel here. Go on there, like us, friend us, chat with us. I love keeping up with you and having discussions. I love people telling me I'm totally wrong with my opinion of the Elvis movie. I've heard that several times. Keep it coming. I enjoyed the discussion. But find me over there with Real Reviews online. Next week, I'm going to be joined by a first-time guest, which we always look forward to around here. It is a young man named Jackson, who I can't wait to discuss movies with. So tune in for that for sure. But until that time, I'm Jamison. Thanks for joining me.